Well, I'm so excited to be here and to be invited by this wonderful student organization, and to have Michael Clare introduce me is like, wow. I love your writing and the fact that you have managed to do what so few people do, which is find that intersection between war and resources and educate people about how these are not two separate things, but these are absolutely interconnected, is so critical. And there's unfortunately so few people who do it, but you do it so beautifully. So thank you, Michael. And we were supposed to do a PowerPoint. I don't know if it's coming, okay. But we'll get started without it. And I want to start just by asking you, and I hope you don't mind, those of you who are US citizens and vote, if I ask you, how many of you voted for Barack Obama? Raise your hands.
Oh, do I have?
You don't have to. You don't have to respond. And if you, how many of you voted for a Green Party candidate? And how many of you voted for another candidate? Rocky Anderson, okay, yeah. I guess no Mitt Romney supporters in the room. I ask that because I don't want my presentation to be judged as an anti-Obama presentation. This is really not about Obama. This is about empire. This is about a country that for all too long has been occupying other countries, taking their resources, using so much of our resources here at home on militarism. And it's really about us as a movement not being strong enough to change the people in power and make them do what we want to do. So I hope you will take that in that context, because under the Bush administration, there were horrible things being done, and we had a big movement. We had a huge movement that got hundreds of thousands of people out on the street. Then Obama came in, and a lot of people felt like, okay, now we have a peace president and we don't have to be going out on the streets again. And people also became preoccupied with an economic crisis and couldn't do things like get themselves to Washington, D.C. or New York for big marches, and had to focus on how do I pay for my college education, how do I keep my home, how do I keep my family together. And those factors together really meant that we had a President Obama in power who maybe would have listened to us, but we didn't have a strong enough movement to push him. And so we're at that place right now, 4 years later, where maybe if we build a strong enough movement again and connect it with other movements like Movement for the Environment, movements that are addressing things like the prison industrial complex in our own society and other things like that, maybe we can get more of the gains that we want to get. So it's really about us. And in that light, talking about us, the American people after 9/11 were really gung-ho for revenge, and decided that it was okay to let the administration, the military, go and invade other countries as part of this desire for revenge. Went into a place, Iraq, that had nothing to do with 9/11, and occupied Afghanistan, where we still are today. When some of us were going out, and I'm sure my good friends who were protesting the wars early on were out on the streets, and maybe not in such a progressive place like this, but in the rest of the country, we were maligned. We were told that we were supporters of Al-Qaeda, that we were terrorist supporters, and it was a very tough atmosphere. Now things have changed so much that the majority of people in this country are saying, why are we in Afghanistan? What's that war all about? Why do we still have troops there? Why are we supporting a government that's so corrupt and that the majority of Afghan people don't even support? And so Americans are also wondering why our own soldiers fighting and dying in a place that we shouldn't even still be there. And that shift of opinion has been happening in the last couple of years. And I see that the powers that be that are in charge of our government and the military were understanding that shift and recognize that if we want to keep fighting these wars, we have to find a way to do it that the American people are going to accept. And it's not going to be boots on the ground. It's not going to be really expensive wars in a time of economic crisis. And lo and behold, there is a technology that now exists that allows this to happen. So when I focus on drones as just one other piece of technology in the military-industrial system. If it weren't drones, it would be something else. But right now, it's drones. So let's talk about drones. What are drones? Drones are just something that flies and that has cameras on them that can be relaying in real time what it's seeing, and that can be weaponized and doesn't have to be weaponized. Drones can be really tiny. They're now in the shape of things like hummingbirds or dragonflies, mimicking nature. They can be flying right outside your window there, and you would have no idea that it was really a drone, and it would be capturing everything that's going on here. There are drones the size of a soldier's, can put them in the backpack, and there are thousands of them now that are being used in places like Afghanistan. They can either be used just for reconnaissance, or there's kamikaze-type little drones that go and find their target, and then they blow up the target, and they blow up themselves. There are big drones called global hawks that are the size of a commercial airplane, and they can be above a city and take a picture and be taking constant images of an entire city. And there are drones the size of a small commercial airplane that are the Predator and Reaper drones that are used for killing people. They were originally reconnaissance spy drones until it was discovered by engineers that they could strap on some weapons, and they became weaponized drones. There are some people in this movement with me who think that this whole technology is terrible and we should try to find a way to put the genie back in the bottle. I happen to think that the technology itself is not bad, it's the way it's being used, and that there are positive uses for drones, like in vast expanses of the Amazon where the Brazilian government is using drones to try to find illegal loggers, or in the oceans where it's very hard to spot illegal whaling, and environmentalists are using drones for that. But I want to focus on what is really driving the whole industry, and that has become killer drones funded by our tax dollars in the Pentagon. So the killer drones are being piloted mostly from here in the United States, but this technology is so amazing that the pilots could be anywhere. And it's almost a surreal kind of situation where you think of a pilot that's sitting in an Air Force base, like outside of Las Vegas, Creech Air Force Base, and is looking at a screen all day long. And the screens are designed like a video game, like a PlayStation with a joystick. And they're in air-conditioned rooms. There was a study done that said that their chairs are not comfortable enough to be sitting for 8 hours, so let's design more ergonomic kind of chairs so they're comfortably sitting back in their chairs. And they are looking at scenarios thousands of miles away. I think most of these people have never been to the countries that they are looking at, certainly don't know the language, the culture, the customs, and yet they are part of an apparatus that is then deciding who lives and who dies in these places. And there are two kinds of pilots, I would say. They're the pilots that feel that this is a good way for them to wage war because in the evening they can go home to their families. And there are others who are very uncomfortable with this, would rather be on the battlefield, signed up with the military to be on the battlefield, and also have a hard time being soldiers or fighters or killers by day and then supposed to be good parents, husbands at night. And I dedicate a chapter of the book to the drone pilots because it's very interesting to hear their stories and how they're feeling about this new way of waging war. But more important is to think about who is being killed and where is that authorization coming from. It turns out that there are two kinds of kills. And there's some seats in the front too, if anybody wants. One is called a personality strike, and that is a list where the government actually knows who they're going after. It's a hit list. It's a kill list. So it's a picture with a name of a person, and this is being discussed every week in the White House on Tuesdays. They call them Terror Tuesdays. And they are looking at what's described as baseball card-like profiles of people. Here's the picture, here's the description of the person, and people are being nominated to be on a kill list. And the kill list then goes out to both the CIA and the Joint Special Operations Command of the military. The other type of strike is called a signature strike. And that is permission to kill people on the basis of suspicious activities. So if you look like you're involved in something suspicious, we don't have to know who you are, your name, anything about you. The CIA is allowed to kill you. So where are these drones being used? They have been used in places where we have had more openly declared war. In the case of Iraq, in Afghanistan, they're still being used in Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia. It seems like they might be used in the near future in Mali. There are drone bases that are being built and have been built throughout the Middle East in places like Qatar and Oman. It's a covert program, so we don't know a lot of where the bases are, but it seems like they are also in the Seychelles and the islands, in the African small nation of Djibouti. The talk in Africa is now that the drone base is going to be built in Niger. The place where the drones have been used the most outside of Iraq and Afghanistan has been Pakistan. And in Pakistan, drone strikes were used under the Bush administration, but there were maybe about 50 drone strikes. After 9/11, what the Bush administration was doing, in addition to waging war directly in Afghanistan, was picking people up in various places around the world, capturing them, and either putting them into Guantanamo or using extraordinary rendition to send them somewhere else where they were likely to be tortured. The Obama administration, Obama campaigned on closing down Guantanamo. And he could have closed down Guantanamo despite opposition from a lot of members in Congress, but didn't want to spend his political capital on that, and Guantanamo remains open. But what the Obama administration legal advisors said is, Guantanamo is very messy. First of all, you campaigned to close it down, so it'd be kind of strange for you to be adding more people to Guantanamo. And second of all, what happens when you get them to a place like Guantanamo is it's very hard to give them fair trials. It's very hard to find the evidence. And that it was really just easier to kill people. And in fact, one of the legal counsels of the Obama administration, when he left, he said that in an interview, said it was cleaner to just use drone strikes. So, yeah, John Rizzo. So in the case of Pakistan, the drone strikes really went up tremendously under the Obama administration. And the numbers are numbers we only gather from organizations of journalists that have been trying to get this information, but since it's a covert program, our government certainly is not going to tell us the truth about it. The group that I think does the best work on this is called the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. It's based in the UK, and they try to piece together the information from lots of different sources. And according to their estimates, there have been between 2,500 and 3,500 people killed. The U.S. can only name 2% of those people killed. And the rest of them, who are they? They are either innocent people or they might be low-level Taliban. We don't really know. It was so important to a number of us in the United States to make direct contact with people in Pakistan that we organized a trip that two people here, and I'd like to really honor them because they were on the trip, and maybe you could stand up, both Chelsea and Packy, and let's give them a hand. And I hope you'll interrupt me and add anything you'd want to add in the presentation, because there were 34 of us that went to Pakistan, and it was a very tough thing to do, because all you hear here is how dangerous it is, especially because we wanted to go up to the tribal areas. And when we got the 34 people together in the hotel where we were staying in Islamabad, I asked, who of you had a loved one who tried to tell you, please do not go on this trip? And everybody raised their hand. And I think Chelsea herself, I'm not going to out you, but extremely courageous of you to go as a young person and somebody whose family I know did not want you to go on this trip, and you have suffered consequences because of that. So this group really did, and everybody had a fundraise for themselves, get themselves to a very difficult place, not knowing what was going to happen. And we had a chance in Islamabad to meet with victims of the drone strikes, and we had a chance to go up as far as we could get to the tribal areas. And some of the stories that we heard were extremely compelling. For example, we met with a man called Karim Khan, who told us that he was living in Islamabad because he worked for Al Jazeera. And one night on December 31st, 2009, he got a phone call in the middle of the night saying that Hellfire missiles from a drone had just wiped out his family's home. And in that strike, his son and his brother were killed. He immediately went back to see the damage that had done to bury the family members. And he told us the story that his brother was a very well-educated man who volunteered to go back to the small village and teach in the village schoolhouse because the Taliban were active in that community. And he wanted to teach the people that education was much more important and more powerful than weapons. And Karim Khan's son also went back to the village wanting to work in the school. And so Karim said, imagine the lesson that was taught to the hundreds of students when their beloved teacher was killed in this drone strike. And we also heard from people who lost family members in at a gathering, traditional gathering called a jirga, where the people come together to try to resolve local disputes. This one happened on March 17th, 2011, when some of the most respected members of the community would come together. They were trying to adjudicate a dispute about a mine. And according to people who were looking at the screen thousands of miles away, this looked like a bunch of no-good Taliban sent in the drones and killed 42 members of that community. And they said, imagine the kind of hatred that spread throughout the area when these respected elders of our community were killed in the drone strike. We also learned about the case of a young man, Tariq Aziz, who was very disturbed by the drones because they were terrorizing his community. Because one of the characteristics of the drones, unlike a normal airplane, is that they circle above and they can stay for hours and hours and hours, and they can come back the next day and circle above. And they circle low enough that you can hear the buzzing of this. And it terrorizes the community. They're afraid to go outside. They're afraid to send their kids to school. They're afraid to go to community gatherings. And one of Tariq Aziz's younger cousins was killed in a drone strike. And so he was invited to Islamabad with a group of other drone strike victims and a group of lawyers for the first time to say, what can we do about this? Can we try to take the cases to court? And we also need better documentation. Can we get some volunteers to be trained to use video cameras and to get us better information about the drone strikes? And Tariq Aziz volunteered, was trained as a citizen journalist, and 2 days after those meetings in Islamabad, the first documentation that happened of a drone strike was one that killed Tariq Aziz and his younger cousin. Well, the lawyers who were with him were incensed and went to the U.S. Embassy and said, why did you kill this young man? And they said, well, he was a militant. Now, we have since learned that the U.S. government says that any male of military age in the places that we are using drone strikes are militants. So that's all they had to say, is he was a male of military age, he was a militant. And they said He was in Islamabad in a public meeting in a well-known hotel for 4 days. If you had all this evidence, why didn't you go in and capture him? Why didn't you go in and give him a chance to surrender, give him a chance to a trial? And of course, they had no answer for that. And the answer is really because they don't have to, because they've been getting away with this kind of thing. So these are the kind of examples that we heard while we were there. We also learned how widespread the hatred is for the drones, and that it cuts across class lines, it cuts across ethnicities, it cuts across political orientation, and it really is something that people feel that shows that the US government is willing to violate the sovereignty of a sovereign nation, and that the US government does not value the lives of people in places like Pakistan. I don't think the US government could get away with this, doing it in a rich white country of Scandinavia, but they're getting away with doing it in a place like Pakistan. So there have been lots of protests. The protest that we participated in was led by the famous cricketer turned politician Imran Khan, and we got a chance to really see how visceral the hatred is of the drones and how that translates to a hatred of Americans. And luckily, we were treated with great kindness and openness by the people we met with. And I'll never forget when we got a chance to talk before a sea of people in the tribal areas as far as we were able to get. And we walked onto the stage, and what we heard them chanting in English was, "Welcome, welcome, welcome, we want peace, we want peace." And after we were there, some of the people wrote to us that you have done more for the image of Americans, the positive image of Americans, than all the billions of dollars that your country has put into our country. Because we were on the front page of the papers, we were in the TV all the time, we would walk around the streets and people would recognize who we were. And at one of the meetings, there was a Pashtun man in the audience who got up and put his hand on his heart and said, "If you came here to win the hearts and minds of the Pakistanis, you've certainly won mine." And it shows that if you have a little love and a little compassion and show it to people, you get a lot of love back. A lesson that we wish our government would learn. This very counterproductive policy in Pakistan that has become a recruiting tool for extremists, that has led to so much anti-American sentiment and that has killed so many innocent people, is now being used in other countries like Yemen. And in fact, the strikes in Yemen have really picked up in 2012 and in this year. And that is because the US government has said that many of the extremists that were in Pakistan have now shifted over to Yemen. Some people call this a whack-a-mole policy, where you hit them in one place and then they go somewhere else. And the friends that we have in Yemen, we've been in touch with a number of groups, and especially with youth groups, because they do not want to live in a state of perpetual war. And there's been so much war in Yemen, just like there's been so much war in Pakistan. And they are saying to us and trying to plead with our government to say that this has become a recruiting tool for extremists. That if you kill 10 extremists, you will get 100 new Al-Qaeda members. That they have even said that in our culture, if you kill one of our family members, and we have no recourse to the courts, we have no recourse through our own governments, what else is there to do but for us to join an extremist organization? And so the estimates are that Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula in Yemen had about 200 adherents in 2009 when we started this program, and now with all these drone strikes, there's over 1,000 members of these extremist groups. One incredible factor in this use of drones is that they've not only been used to kill foreigners overseas, but they have been used to kill US citizens. And this has happened in the case of Yemen. There was a cleric, an American citizen. He was his parents were from Yemen, returned to Yemen, and his name was Anwar al-Awlaki. Fiery sermons that he gave against the West the Obama administration on a Terror Tuesday put him on the kill list, and he and another American, Samir Khan, were killed in a drone strike. Well, 2 weeks after that, this Anwar al-Awlaki's son, Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki, a 16-year-old, born in Denver, an American citizen. If we had the slides, we do, actually. Can I pull up one? So I just want to show you a picture of him because this was from his Facebook page. And it is shows a smiling young man who said that he loved hip-hop, he loved rap, he loved swimming. His friends said he was a typical teenager, not involved in militant activity, and he was taken by his grandparents back to Yemen, and he was at a camp out one night, having a campfire meal with a bunch of teenage friends when he and his friends were all hit by a drone strike, and all of them were killed. Now, this is an American citizen. This is a teenager. And I'm amazed that there was not a huge outcry in the United States about killing an American teenager. And I hearken back to the case of Trayvon Martin. Raise your hand if you know the case of Trayvon Martin. So most of you do. And this is a young African-American man in Florida who was killed by a vigilante, George Zimmerman, because George Zimmerman thought he appeared threatening when he had absolutely no weapon on him, and he was just killed in cold blood. And it would have passed unremarked except for the parents were so incensed that they went out and they started speaking and organizing, and all kinds of groups got involved, and there was so much groundswell that not only did the case gain momentum, but President Obama came out and expressed his sympathy for the family of Trayvon Martin and said, if I, President Obama, had a son, he might have looked like Trayvon Martin. And that's why I think it's important to look at this picture, because I think if President Obama had a son, he also could have looked like Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki. And yet, there was no sympathy for the killing of this American teenager. There was no apology for the killing of this American teenager. And there was not even a recognition that this American teenager had been killed by the United States. In fact, I put a quote here from former White House spokesman Robert Gibbs. When asked to justify the killing of younger al-Awlaki, he said, "I would suggest that you should have a far more responsible father." So this means under American law, you can now be killed because of not liking what your father has done. This is a huge question that the legal community in the United States really has to grapple with. And has to grapple with especially now because the mastermind of the drone strikes is now slated to be confirmed as the next director of the CIA, and that is John Brennan. And those hearings are coming up this Thursday, and in the Senate Intelligence Committee. And we have been working in the Senate Intelligence Committee trying to find senators who will say, we reject this person, and they will not do that. So it is very, very sad. We're in the situation right now where our government is killing foreigners overseas and killing American citizens and getting away with it. We can talk later in the questions if you want to about the legal basis for this, but I want to just sum up with two other things. One is that some people might think the U.S. can get away with this because we are the only ones that have this technology. That is not the case. In fact, now there is a global proliferation of drones, U.S. companies selling them overseas, Israel, the #1 exporter of drones and the #2 user of drones against the Palestinians, and China getting into the act, selling many drones. Most of these are surveillance drones, but the countries that have been bought them are now in the process of weaponizing those drones, and 6 countries have already done that. Other countries like Iran have hacked into U.S. spy drones, downed them, reversed engineered them, and are producing them themselves. So you do have to think about what kind of model are we presenting to the rest of the world when we can go anywhere we want, kill anyone we want on the basis of secret information, and now other countries have this same ability. The other issue we have to talk about is drones coming home to the United States, because the manufacturers of these drones are very concerned that some of the wars are winding down. Where are they going to sell these drones? And they're looking not only to FBI, Homeland Security, Border Patrol, Forest Service, but they're also looking to the police departments and would like to sell them to the 18,000 police departments that exist here in the United States. They have, the drone manufacturers have pushed through a law in the US that says by September of 2015, drones have to be incorporated into the US airspace, and it's estimated that there will be 20 or 30,000 drones in our airspace in the coming decade. The relevance to the universities is there are lots of universities that are involved in the production and research for drones, and so we're working with a lot of students right now to try to find those connections and try to sever those connections. Some police departments are already experimenting with the drones. The technology is still in its early stages and they crash all the time. And this was a particularly funny one because they held a press conference to show off their new drone, which they bought with money from Homeland Security because police departments don't have money to buy drones. And as soon as they started flying it, it crashed into the tank. I want to end on a positive note, which is when I was doing this work for this book a year ago, there was very little that was known about drones. I would go speak to audience and they would say, what are you talking about? There in the last year has been so much more information that has come out and so many more people participating in actions around drones. Everywhere in the US now where there are drones that are being piloted, there are protests going on at those bases. Upstate New York is fantastic. They do what they call a Gandhian wave, coming out constantly, people from the community coming out, getting arrested, the next wave coming in, getting arrested, using it to educate the community, using the trials to talk about international law and our responsibility according to the Nuremberg principles to intervene when we think that there are war crimes being committed. There are protests at the headquarters and the manufacturing bases where these drones are being manufactured. There are, Jeff mentioned the faith-based call. We're going to be announcing on Monday 100 faith-based leaders who have come out and not only oppose the drones, but are opposing John Brennan's nomination for a CIA director. And in the UN just announced last week that it is launching an investigation into the US use of drones and probably the Israeli use of drones right now, that they are concerned about war crimes being committed, and they will come out with their report in the spring. And in April, there's going to be an announcement by a coalition of groups, including a group of scientists called the International Committee for Robot Arms Control, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, groups like that, launching an international campaign to try to stop the next level of drones that is being researched, and that is drones that don't even have a pilot remotely controlling them. They're all pre-programmed to go out and kill X type of people in X type of place, killer robots. So there is a lot of work being done to try to rein in these lethal drones, and I'm very excited about the new energy that's out there. So thank you for coming to this talk and for listening, and I hope we can now open it up to discussion and hear from local people what else you can do. Thanks. So before we open up to question, I just do want to make sure that people who are doing local work get a chance to say, and I know Jeff has already mentioned some of the things, but yes?
After Paki Leland came back from this trip to Pakistan and told us about Terror Tuesdays, those of us who came to hear the talk, We started doing a vigil every Tuesday at noon. One is at the First Church in Amherst, the other's at the First Churches in Northampton, and we are there every Tuesday, and we call it Meeting with the President. So if anybody's interested, I have some cards, and if you want to give them to somebody else, please do.
We're holding an event on March 28th at Jones Library in Amherst, showing a couple of film remixes, and it's all about the military-industrial complex. My film, Dark Legacy, JFK 9/11, ties the dots between that and the 50th anniversary of JFK, the 50th anniversary this year as Federal Reserve, which I think is brings up my question.
No, we're not to the questions yet. So also we're going to send around sign-up sheet. Pocky, did we send that around, right? So it's going around. We'd love you to stay in touch with us at Code Pink. It'd be great if you want to get a Code Pink group going on campus. And we also have a website called droneswatch.org where there's constant information about this. The Code Pink website as well. So, yes.
We have a donation box that's going to be circulated around for victims of drone strikes in Pakistan. And Medea is speaking at Odyssey tomorrow afternoon, so we're going to have a donation box set up there as well. So if you guys want to contribute something, that would be great. Thank you.
Terrific. So let's hear from some of the students now. I'd love to hear your concerns, questions. Yes.
So you commented on the legal efforts for challenging the assassination program, and I was hoping you could speak about what you think, how far we can get given sort of the United States use of secrecy doctrines and FOIA requests being rejected. I mean, what are the alternative ways of going about it if you can't even get through that kind of fundamental stage?
Well, your question is excellent because when you have this kind of a covert program, the courts don't work for us. Because you take these issues to court and the court says, well, it's a covert program, and it's surreal. I've been to the hearings where the ACLU has brought cases on behalf of the al-Awlaki family, for example. And even though now we have the president talking about drone strikes, we have John Brennan talking about drone strikes, we've had the Leon Panetta, the Secretary of Defense, talking about them, they still insist it's a covert program and that they don't have to, in fact, they will not give this information out. And so the courts say, sorry, there's nothing we can do about it. It's so crazy that with the hearings coming up on Tuesday, the Senate Intelligence Committee members, we have been lobbying them to hold up the nomination to get some more information. And there was an excellent letter written by a Senator Wyden from Oregon who said, I have been asking you for 2 years to give us the legal memos that form the legal basis for you to use these drone strikes. And I, on the Senate Intelligence Committee, supposed to be in charge of oversight, have not been able to get those memos, which is really incredible. So the courts are not really a venue that there can be any redress at this point. It's more for symbolic reasons that we're using the courts. Now, in the case of Pakistan, they're trying to use the courts. In fact, when they brought a case against the director of the CIA in the courts in Pakistan, they named the director of the CIA, and he was forced to leave the country. So in that sense, it had some direct impact. But they've also tried to bring to the courts cases against the U.S. ambassador, because the U.S. ambassador has to sign off on these drone strikes. And they've been bringing cases against the Pakistani government for not doing enough to protect Pakistani citizens. These cases are still winding their way slowly through the courts.
I had a couple questions, but my main question is, Al Jazeera was bought by a billionaire in Qatar. That's who owns that. So I'm questioning the veracity of the information on Al Jazeera. And so, but my bigger question is, what journalistic semblance of truth can you access outside of the United States? forget U.S. information, we don't even want to go there necessarily, but what outside of the U.S. can you read that's going to give you some idea of what's really happening?
There's a lot of good places for information, both within the United States and outside the United States. And, with our access to so many different venues on the web, I think The Guardian is a great source of information. I think I go to places like Alternet and Common Dreams, and I like The Nation. Anybody else want to say your favorite sites?
Because the Bureau of Investigative Journalism has a great daily count of drone strikes.
And an explanation of each one as well, and an analysis.
And also the Dissenter, Firedog Lake.
Firedog Lake, great on this as well as many other issues. Truth Out is another good one.
BBC can sometimes have some pretty reliable information.
BBC, very good information.
I think there's a lot of Pakistani publications like Dawn, Newsline, the Express Tribune, which have a lot of pieces on drone strikes and the Pakistani opinion on them. So those are good sources. And there's also the Living Under Drones project being conducted by, I think, Columbia University and New York University. So that's a good source to look at for reports on who's being killed, what's happening in the deaths.
And just one more, Russian TV. You can't trust them for anything out of Russia.
It's been totally infiltrated by the CIA. It used to be a viable news source. It no longer is.
Yeah, I disagree with you.
Well, there's a lot of places to go for information, and I think we have to search around and find what you consider particularly.
One more place, sounding somewhat self-serving, WXOJLP, Valley Free Radio, 103.3.
Ooh. And of course, Democracy Now! If you don't know it, check it out. Go. It should be your a daily source of information. And then I must say, while I love some segments and don't love others, Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert can give you a lot of news couched as a comedy, but some very good. In fact, I quote Stephen Colbert in my book because when I talked about the case of Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki, and I was calling around to these brilliant constitutional lawyers to ask them what they say about this after he was killed. And Stephen Colbert had a segment on it, and he said, when Eric Holder gave a talk to try to justify the killing of Americans, Eric Holder said, well, you might not know it, but Americans are not guaranteed the right to a judicial process. You are guaranteed the right to due process. So Stephen Colbert said, yes, the founders weren't picky. Trial by jury, trial by fire, rock, paper, scissors, who cares? Due process just means there's a process that you do. The current process is the president meets with his advisors, decides who to kill, and then kills them. If we're going to win our never-ending war against terror, there are bound to be casualties, Colbert sighed, and one of them just happens to be the U.S. Constitution. What better commentary could you get? Yeah.
You mentioned the UN, and especially in war crimes, because not only U.S. maybe, but Israel also. Is this the first time they've really spoken out about the drone strikes? And can you talk more about that process and what's happening? Because I know that in regards to the Palestinian side also that they're not officially, they're trying to get onto the court, but they're not yet. So do you know how that's working in Pakistan and Israel?
Yeah, the UN has so many different agencies and also has individuals who are in charge of certain things, like a special rapporteur, it's called. There's one for extrajudicial killings. There's one for human rights. They have spoken out against the U.S., and there have been some reports done that are condemning the U.S., but this is the first time they're actually going to take cases, individual cases, and look at these cases. And so it really is an escalation of the U.S. involvement in this. And it seems that they are looking into taking a couple of the cases from the Israeli invasion of Gaza. So I think, when the reports happen, they don't have teeth to them in terms of then you can't take the U.S. to court and put, John Brennan or Barack Obama in jail or whatever. But they are very important for the prestige of the United States. They shame the United States, and they can have an impact. Just as the U.S. has refused to sign on to so many international treaties, like the treaty to ban landmines or cluster bombs. But the fact that the rest of the world is signing on to them forces the U.S. not to use those weapons. So I think it has importance, even though, unfortunately, it doesn't mean that somebody will be held responsible. Yes?
Why do you think, since it's pretty obvious that they create more terrorists than eliminate, and it's been told to them and they've had this to watch for 10 years, so to me, I watch actions, and I think they're purposely wanting that to happen. Why would that be, and how to respond to that type of deception and policy?
Well, I think that there's several ways to look at this, and I think there's differences within our government, and don't think that our government is a monolith. There's all kinds of people in the government with all kinds of ways of looking at things, and I think there are very good people in the government who want to protect us from harm, and think that if they have to, that these weapons are more precise, that they are trying hard not to kill innocent people, but that they have to do this to keep Americans safe. I think there's other people, let me finish please. I think there's other people in the government who think, I just want to make sure there's no terrorist attack on my watch, because politically that would be devastating for me. And so yes, we're going to have to kill innocent people in doing so, but that's just the way it is. And then I think there's other people who are part of a hawkish military mindset that only see responses in terms of military ones. And we saw that in full swing yesterday when the Armed Services Committee was meeting to look at the confirmation hearing for Chuck Hagel as the next Secretary of Defense. Nothing against all white guys, but these are like almost all white guys. And they have been, almost all of them, in the military themselves. They talked yesterday about all their military service, and my brother and his brother, and my days in going back to whether it's World War II, and then really glorifying their days in Vietnam, which shouldn't be glorified. And then, so there's a lot of glorification of war, and there's a lot of people in our government who are part of the revolving door of the military-industrial complex. And when they're not working in our government, they're working in some company or lobbying for some company. And so all of this is part of our government. And I think it's most important to think about, what do we do? How do we build strong movements? How does change happen in this country throughout our history? And it's through people getting involved in significant numbers, taking risks in the work that they're doing, working on all different levels, from street demonstrations to pressuring their Congress to doing things like shaming the manufacturers. All of this is part of movement building. And that what we need is a much stronger movement. And right now, I think our movement is recognizing, and I know you don't want me to single you out, Michael, but it's thanks to people like you and the writings that you do, recognizing that this military-industrial complex is not something that is isolated. That if you are having problem paying your college tuition, part of the reason for that is the military-industrial complex. And if your parents are having a hard time holding on to their homes, part of it is the corporation domination of our country that includes the military-industrial complex. And so once we see these as intertwined, it's easier for us to make alliances with groups all over the country that are trying to build a society that will make us a more profound democratic country and not an empire. And that's long-time work. That's lifetime work. We talk about people like Frances Crowe. I mean, to have seen her just now at 92 talking about when her next demonstration is. I mean, these are the people that we need to honor, and this is the kind of lifetime work that we need more people to commit themselves to.
So one argument that I hear as a student at Mount Holyoke and otherwise even at home in Pakistan from a lot of sort of the secular elite is that drone strikes are actually successful, that they're killing these terrorists. So what extent from your research is this true? And if it's not, then what are the sort of the myths that are like deceiving people into thinking that it's actually killing terrorists?
Well, it certainly is killing people that have been killing terrorists. But you have to look at, is it a productive way to counter terrorism? And it is not. You kill the number 3 man in the Taliban, and the number 4 man becomes the number 3 man. You so alienate people in the Waziristan that they find themselves between a rock and a hard place. They find themselves between Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, who most people hate, and between the drone strikes that most people hate. And it just keeps that cycle of violence going, and it justifies some of the violence being perpetrated by groups like the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. If it had worked, Pakistan would be a more stable country today than it was when we started this in 2004, and it is not. If it had worked in Yemen, Yemen would be a more stable country today than it was when we started the drone strikes, and it is not. So I think that we have to say that it is counterproductive, that it is the #1 recruiting tool now for extremist organizations, and that we have to look for policies that work. And policies that work are policies that focus on things like, why do people join extremist groups to begin with? How can we support people in Pakistan that are trying to do things like educate girls and save them from being attacked by the Taliban? How do we support democratic institutions? And these are the more long-term perspectives and non-military perspectives. But in the book I look at 268 different organizations that were considered terrorist groups, and looks at them over the course of 60 years. And it was a study done not by some left-wing organization, but it was done by RAND. And they showed that the 43% of the groups came to their demise because of better policing, that it was a policing kind of issue. That the almost the equivalent came to their demise through negotiations, and only 7% through military activity. So let's take a look at studies like that and recognize that what we're doing just doesn't work. Let's see, somebody hasn't spoken.
Hi, I have a question about the use of drones in countries like Pakistan and Yemen, and what kind of agreement exists between the governments of those countries and the US government. Because in the case of Israel's use of drones, it is kind of evident that there was no agreement, it was just used as a method of warfare. But in case of Pakistan, I've heard about a lot of covert agreements between my government, I'm a Pakistani, and the US government. And I'm curious about what kind of agreements are there, and what is the factor that convinces Pakistan and Yemen and governments like those to actually allow this on their territory.
So first, let's recognize that not only is it a covert program in the United States, but it's a covert program in places like Pakistan and Yemen. And the people who have helped us get information around this are either holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, i.e. Julian Assange, or Bradley Manning spent over 1,000 days in prison in pre-trial imprisonment and is facing the rest of his life in prison. People who are trying to shed a light on what are supposed to be democratic countries are the ones who are going to jail. And in fact, the only person who is about to go to jail for torture in this country is a whistleblower. So that's a sad commentary on just as background to this question. But we've learned from the WikiLeaks cable that while the Pakistani government, under Gilanian in this case, had said, okay, you do the drone strikes and we'll pretend that we're against them. And that was exactly the case in Yemen under the dictatorship of the last government, who said the same thing. Now, who are these governments and who do they represent? You know, another question. So in the meantime, I think the government of Pakistan has really recognized that these drone strikes are counterproductive. And so there's been a real shift of saying, okay, we don't want them anymore. We really think now they are not helping. And they are turning people not only against the United States, they're turning them against the Pakistani government, and reverberating into massive killing of Pakistani police, Pakistani officials. And there have been unanimous votes in parliament with all different political parties saying we don't want these drone strikes. When the foreign minister came to the United States and she was asked, why do 3 out of 4 Pakistanis say the United States is an enemy, she had a one-word answer, and it was drones. So I think the Pakistani, the majority of people in the Pakistani government would like to see an end to the drone strikes. It doesn't mean by the US. They would rather have drones in their own hands because they say we could target it better. You don't know who you're targeting and you're creating a big mess. In the case of Yemen, the new government that came in after an uprising in the Arab Spring has said, the president now says he's in favor of drone strikes. But he's getting opposition within his own government. And in fact, the human rights minister of Pakistan just came out 2 weeks ago and said, these drone strikes are terrible. We don't want that there are other ways to deal with this, and we shouldn't be allowing this in our country. Just looking for people who haven't had a chance to say anything.
You spoke about empire when you started talking, and empire is a topic that people don't really think about. I think that is irrelevant these days, day and age. It's not part of the mainstream debate. How do you think that, because it is a huge reason for a lot of things that are happening right now, so how do you think that debates about empire or just discourses on empire can kind of come into the mainstream media so that people will be more aware of what the US is doing and what patterns it's following, and what the whole argument is about food security and peace and all of those things?
I don't think it's a useful concept to be trying to talk about in mainstream circles. It just doesn't work, and I would love to hear your response to this, Michael. But I think there are so many other levels on which we could talk about this. There are so many just issues around legality. There's so many issues of why does the CIA have armed drones? The CIA, that is supposed to be an intelligence gathering organization, should not be in charge of a drone program. And there are people within the military who are saying that. There are people even quoted in the New York Times that says the CIA is out of control, and when they see 4 Pakistanis doing jumping jacks in northern Pakistan, they say it's a Taliban training camp and send in the drones. So there's other ways that we can talk about this and deal with this that are easier for people to hear right now when we're talking specifically about this drone program. But I would love to hear your answer about how we talk about empire.
Oh, empire, that's a great question. That's a coarse question, maybe not for now.
Give us the summary.
I do say that the U.S. has an empire of oil. An empire of oil. That since President Roosevelt met with King Abdulaziz in 1945 to establish a protectorate over Saudi Arabia in the mode of Great Britain, that we have an empire of oil, and that has shaped American foreign policy ever since.
And one of the things I think is good to talk about in terms of U.S. Perception around the world, and particularly in the Arab world, is the continued support for dictatorships that the U.S. maintains because of this empire of oil, and particularly around Saudi Arabia. And if you're going to say if there's one country that was most intimately involved around 9/11, Saudi Arabia, and yet that is the one country where the U.S. is doing the largest weapons deal ever in history, is with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia recently crushed the democratic uprising in Bahrain. So we can talk about how the U.S. continues to support governments because of this dependence on oil.
What is your opinion on things like, on movies like 0 Dark 30 and laws that are going to allow women to be part of combat in the American military, and what they do to keep the war on terror relevant in American society?
Good question, and I think that that movie, I saw that movie and I just was ready to vomit. I mean, 0 Dark 30. Raise your hand if you've seen it. Well, somebody want to comment on how you felt?
Well, at first I thought it was going to be very political about, should we have done this, we should have not done this, but I found it was more about, I had mixed views of the movie. I thought that the violence was not needed, some of the torture scenes were not needed, it was really excessive, and it was disgusting. And I had to turn my head away for a couple of them. But at the same time, I thought it was interesting how they focused on what we had to do to get that, because I feel like that's not something that a lot of people know, so I felt like it was more of an educational thing. But they were showing us, how they did this, and this to get to good modern. So even though I wasn't a big fan of the movie, I appreciated the fact that I think it was trying to educate us about what happened, because I think a lot of it is very hush-hush.
Or what they want to do.
Wait, I want to ask, is there a Pakistani who might want to, yeah.
I think it just shows that the movie endorses torture, although Catherine Bigelow said that, it's not an educational account, but the fact that you put at the beginning of the movie that this movie is based on true events, and then you show torture, and you don't show torture to the extent that it ruins the human soul. You don't show its actual consequences. You show what's okay for people to see. So I don't think that it was an education account, and in fact I think that on the Academy's part, to reward movies like 0 Dark 30, to reward shows like Homeland, this year I think there was a very great article, I don't remember in what publication, but there was an article about how Islamophobia is a winner in this year's Academy, and I don't think that the ordinary American is to be at fault, because I feel like you go there to watch it as a movie, or maybe as an educational sort of documentary, but that's not what it is. And the misrepresentation of events and the way that things have been depicted, that I saw tweets of people talking about, I hate all Arabs now, I want to blow up brown people now, Muslims are pathetic, and just so much hateful dialogue going on the social media community and the internet community that it made me honestly want to throw up. And so for me it was very disturbing to hear the commentary on it. I really don't think that it's something that's truthful, that's educational, or even beneficial for the larger debates in society.
Did we answer the second part of your question? Yeah? Okay.
I wondered if you could talk about Blackwater and the companies that are involved in this, because it's beyond the military, and they keep changing their name, but they're very deeply involved.
Well, so the question is really about the private security companies, and private security companies are very intimately involved in the drone program, because the CIA uses private contractors in every single aspect of the drone program. And privatization of our military has been something that's been going on for a long time now. And it's very scary, not only from the point of view of these totally unaccountable companies that, as you said, keep changing their name. When they're convicted of fraud, suddenly they pop up again with another name. The company that you referred to, Blackwater, has had, I think, 11 different names so far. And the name right now is a very professorial sounding name. It's called Academy. And they have now moved out of the United States to have no transparency or accountability, and have moved to Dubai and are now leasing themselves out to dictatorships around the world. So these private security firms have become a force of their own, and they're very powerful in the United States as trying to keep these wars going, because they get such lucrative contracts as a result of it. And I moved recently to Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C., the counties around Virginia have become, in this economic crisis time, the richest counties in the United States. And you go around and you see mansion after mansion after mansion, and so many of them are people who work for these private security firms. They make so much money, and as I did in a rap song that my daughter said was the worst thing I ever did, but you can find it online. We did a rap song called Blackwater Makes a Killing Out of Killing, but they really do make a lot of money off of this. So I think we have time for a couple, maybe 2 more comments.
I've researched on drone strikes this last semester, and part of what I wanted to do this break was to visit the Foundation for Fundamental Human Rights that you have worked with in the past. But I think one caveat that we as Pakistanis face in Pakistan is that I don't know how you got access to those areas, but you were strictly denied access. And this time was too short to really push it forward. But I mean, in terms of just pushing this work forward, and not only in the united context of the United States, but also to pressurize our own national government to, take this into serious account. How do you recommend that we as Pakistanis should push ourselves forward? Because I mean, I was really confused about how to go forward. I was in touch with a couple of people I knew, but then again, it's so much pressure.
It's a very hard question to answer because it's so hard to get access. And we only got as far as we could get because we were with Imran Khan, and it was a whole huge caravan. It just couldn't be stopped, but it finally was stopped by the government too. I can put you in touch with a very good young woman lawyer who has been working not by going to the region, but by interviewing people in jail, young people who were attempting to be suicide bombers. And she was interviewing them to find out what was it that made them want to do this. And some of it was drone strikes, and some of it was other ways where they just became convinced that the West hated them. And that's very interesting and easier kind of work in a sense. And I think there are other ways to get at this issue. And I think for U.S. Pakistanis, it's obviously in a much broader context. Because, the U.S., the CIA is going to try to kill as many people as it can in this next year before the troops leave Afghanistan. And then they're going to focus more on Yemen, and they're going to focus more on Africa. And yet Pakistan's going to be left with this continued mess that you have to deal with. So I think you have to put the drones in the larger context of what radicalizes people, why do people join extremist groups, what can be done to stop that, what can be done to support the work of people who want to see girls educated, who want to see other types of schools that teach tolerance. It's kind of really in that context I think you have to look at this. And I wanted to just read this little tiny thing from the book, because as we're talking about you saying how Americans now, after watching Zero Dark 30, are saying, we hate all Muslims. This was from the Pakistani who's been risking his life to go photograph the drone strikes, and we met with him, and he said, most of the time the drones just evaporate their victims. Sometimes they're just pieces of flesh lying around after a strike. You can't find bodies. So the locals pick up the flesh and curse America. They say that America is killing us inside our own country, inside our own homes, and only because we are Muslims. So that's the perception from the other side, and something that Americans, unfortunately, don't get to hear. So I want to just thank you for giving me the time here to talk, and to recognize that there are such amazing activists in this community. And this community is known all across the country for the work that's done here, and I think is really inspiring to people around the country to know that you can take centers of education, get marvelous professors who really teach very profound truths about this country, and have it integrated into an activist community that brings together both the students and the community to try to have policies locally, on the national level, and globally that reflect the kind of values that we want to see reflected throughout the society. So thank you to those of you who are activists here and been doing this work for a long time. And I really appreciate the students who are doing this work right now, because it's difficult to do this. And I especially want to thank the Pakistani women for what you're doing. Thank you so much.